It shouldn't do that.
Recording in progress.
Okay, all good. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. We're just going to give people a few minutes to join, to kind of trickle in. I'm going to bring Kezia up to the virtual platform in a minute. We're just going to give people a few more minutes to join us, and then we're going to get started very shortly. So yes, we're going to get started now. So thank you everyone once again for joining us. My name is Olugbeminiyi Idowu, and this is the Africa Marcom Series. And the idea for this series is we want to bring together experts from across the marketing and communication disciplines that work in the African space and share best practice and sort of have conversations about the work we do and how we can basically improve across the board. Today, we have a very special guest that is going to be talking to us today. We have Kezia Anim-Addo, who's Director of Communications at Meta, which is formerly Facebook. So Meta is for those who may be unsure, Meta is the parent company. Meta is the parent company of Instagram, Facebook, and WhatsApp, and those guys there. Kezia runs the comms for the Sub-Saharan Africa team, and it's a great honor and a privilege to have her on today. I've had the privilege of knowing Kezia for some time now. I don't want to bore you with the history lesson about how long I've been sort of badgering Kezia with a lot of questions about PR and how she's helping along the way. I'm sure you guys don't want to hear too much about that today. But the idea is for us to have a conversation about the work that she does, and for her to share some insights. So we're going to get started, but before that, I'm just going to tell you a little bit more about Kezia, just some background. So she's a global PR and comms expert with 16 plus years of experience with brands from across the world. She's currently Director of Communications at Meta for Sub-Saharan Africa, as I said. But before that, if you check the slide that's on your screen now, you will see that she has worked with some rather impressive companies. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation that we are going to have today. Without further ado, I am going to get started with the conversation. I've got a few questions. First of all, thanks for joining us today, Kezia. If you just mind just speaking to the mic, just to make sure everything is where it should be.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you very well. I can hear you very well. Thank you. Yeah, so I guess the best place to start would be for you to tell us about your career. So how did you tell us about your career? How did you get started in PR?
Oh gosh, every time I ask that question, I always have to think back to 16 years ago or so. And that always scares me because I'm getting old. So I think I came across PR. I mean, my mum, has a background in communications many years ago, actually in Ghana. She used to work for the previous head of state. But I kind of came in it through my own journey, I guess. So again, many years ago when I was at secondary school, I remember volunteering to do some work with the Youth Sports Trust. And as part of that, there was this they were one of the charities and beneficiaries for Nike. And there was this huge event that was happening in West London, and I remember Michael Jordan being flown over, and all these sports stars, and essentially, they gathered us all on a bus, so we went down there to kind of essentially host children in the local area. And I remember seeing there was a group of people, everyone had headsets on and walkie-talkies, and they were running things. And I was like, oh, I want to do what they're doing. They look more fun. And then, after the event, I just wanted to speak to the guy, and turns out it was an agency that he owned. So I just went and I'd love to have a conversation with you. And a few weeks later, I just went to his office. I remember it being just off in central London, off Oxford Street, had a conversation. It wasn't right for me to kind of do anything there, but I realized very quickly that, this is a very small industry, right? And everyone seems to know everyone. So he actually recommended another agency that I could go and speak to them and maybe do work experience there. And that's basically how it started. So before I even, stepped foot to have a full-time paying job in comms, I had done work experience at ID magazine. I'd done work experience at Freud. I had done, and this is all free as well.
Of course, the days of unpaid internships.
Yeah. So I'd done all of that before, even some of this stuff was before going to uni. Some of it was during university, coming back. So I guess that's where my career started, really.
Oh, excellent. Yeah. So I don't want to age you, but you've been in PR and comms for about 16 plus years. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you think has changed in that time, or what you think may have stayed the same as well?
What's changed? I mean, like, look, as with life and everything, like things change and, new technologies come in. I remember back in the day, again, when I was on work experience and when I was doing my first placement year, like, you have to do coverage books for clients.
Oh, good old coverage books. Hey.
You had to actually get the newspaper, put it on the little chopping board, reach kind of like cut it up, stick it down perfectly.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously times have changed a lot since that. There is no cutting out and, those kind of coverage books. But like, I think like, look, for me, it feels like a lot has changed, and I think this comes with just the world changing. Digital is so important, right? Digital was not a thing many years ago, but it is now, right?
It was a bit strange, like thinking about it, like the fact that like not so long ago, digital practically didn't exist.
Exactly. But it did exist when I was younger. I just have to say that. It was clear. But it just wasn't a thing like how it is now. Like, the world of influencers wasn't really a thing. I remember when I was, one of the clients I used to work for was Apple. And I remember launching the first generation iPod into the UK. There was so much, buzz about it. And I remember like we had to like, physically be calling agents to give them, to the products that they could use so they can give it to their, now that doesn't, you don't have to do that, right? Social media do that. And you have influencers. And so I feel like a lot has changed, but as it should do, as the world is changing, comms needs to change, because obviously our job is to represent the brands or the clients that you have to get consumers to buy into whether it's buying your products or using your products. So we have to make sure that we're changing as well. Yeah,
that makes perfect sense. I think as part of your role at Meta, Meta is obviously like a huge company with like a global footprint. One of the things I really wanted to talk to you about today was that role, and for us to discuss basically I know people will be curious, what does a typical day in Meta's comms office look like? I know you probably say no 2 days are typical, but if you can give us like as broad an overview as possible, I think that would be a good place to get started.
Sure. I mean, like, look, you said it, no 2 days are the same. To be honest, no 2 hours are the same. So, under, my remit. So I have an amazing team, really high performing team. I know some of them watching now, amazing team that they're split out regionally, right? So, under my remit, it's 48 countries. As you can imagine, across Africa. So that's the whole of Sub-Saharan Africa. So, as most of you watching will know, Africa is obviously not a country, and it's a continent with many, many different languages, different cultures, different types of people. So it literally just depends also on where my focus needs to be, right? So, I think in one day I can be spending dealing with a big issue that's a big issue in a country, or actually it's a big global issue, and managing that with my team and trying to get to the bottom of things and, writing statements and dealing with journalists. On the other hand, the other thing that, I'm really passionate about is, and I always wanted, a job that, focused on the Africa continent. But I didn't want to work for a charity, an NGO. Like, I'd done that, and I just didn't want to work for an NGO. I was like, no, because I know that it's not, all doom and gloom. Like, I know when I come to Ghana, the life that some of my friends and family are living, I'm just like, you guys have a better life than me here. So, I know it's not all doom and gloom. I know there's so much talent, and there's so much, and I really wanted a job that could really just highlight some of that. So I see my role and that of my team is to really put a spotlight on the continent. Yes, our focus is on obviously Meta, so whether it's Instagram or WhatsApp or Facebook and how people are using it, but to put a spotlight on that. And also to really kind of amplify the continent. So we spend a lot of our time creating campaigns, right? So campaigns, whether it's, what we launched, for the past 2 years around Africa Day, which was a campaign called Made in Africa, Loved by the World. And this was spotlighting like 16 individuals from across the continent who are literally made in Africa and loved by the world. So whether it's their music that's being listened to in, across the diaspora, whether it's the UK or France or the US, or whether it's products or like designers. There was, one person that we featured in the past who she is from Senegal. She's she's a fashion designer. She also, designs jewelry. She uses Instagram. That's her main medium, and that's her main medium for being able to obviously sell her products and so forth, and obviously to showcase what she does. Far away somewhere else in the US, one of Beyonce's team came across her page, loved her stuff. Beyonce then, her team then essentially asked her to create a whole load of items for Beyonce's last world tour.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, when I see things like that, those are the stories I really want to tell, to show that actually, our platforms are enabling people to go and sit on a world stage and also compete with other global names, whether they're musicians and so forth. So I think, I look at it too. So there's the day-to-day that needs to be done, but then there's the telling stories. And for me, that's the telling stories is where what I'm really passionate about. And I think what's so important as well.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. I think one of the things that I often get asked, and I'm sure you probably get asked as well, is about the process. Like, how do you, especially working for a company the size of Meta, and that the stakes are obviously going to be very high. For lack of a better word, what's the creative process like in terms of when you go into that planning process? Are there any things that you sort of try to pinpoint, say, okay, when the planning, you're aiming for this particular element to be in any campaigns you're going for? Do you have anything like that, or do you have any particular formulas you follow in terms of your planning process?
So look, I think it'll probably be different. If you ask me or ask other people in my team, they'll probably tell you different things. I think that's dependent on, is this an Africa-wide campaign? Is this regional, or is this just a country focus? So I think, look, overall, when I'm thinking about, how we're planning campaigns or what we're actually highlighting, for me, the things that we, really put a spotlight on are the things that make Africa unique. Right? Because then you could be, and I think that's really important as well when you're telling, part of my remit is to tell that story internationally. So how, like for CNN, BBC and everything else. So, what makes our region really unique? What are the stories, what are the businesses that are coming out? But also really importantly, I think there's another part which is all about educating, right? Because we are the youngest age continent on earth. We do have a lot of people coming online for the first time. So I also see that the role we have, which is really important, is to educate people and media as to our platforms and how to use it safely, even how to use it for business, that kind of stuff as well. So there's a kind of, so again, I think it depends what, without giving too much away, it depends on, what the focus is, but there is a big focus around educating. So within education, obviously you can have different things that fall underneath that. So whether it's how do I use Instagram to do this or whatever. And then the other element is around, telling those stories. So is it actually, showcasing the guy that's using WhatsApp to, for his kids in a village in school to set their homework. So he uses WhatsApp to do that, right? So you find stories like that, or is it like the story that I just told you about, or is it, those are the other things as well. So I think, our overlay is always very much as a region, what makes this unique to Africa? And also, what are we doing as in terms of our responsibility? And this is where the education bit comes in.
Cool, that makes perfect sense. But in a way, like I think we all know that, fortunately or maybe unfortunately is probably the right way to put it. Like, it's not always great and good news with Facebook. There's often like Facebook, or Meta, I should call it. Still getting used to calling it Meta, but Meta often gets dragged into these sorts of controversies about content and all that kind of stuff. How do you deal with those kind of situations? Because I think that's the other side of comms that often doesn't get a lot of spotlight. How do you deal with like a crisis, or how do you deal with crises?
I laugh because I think that's what I'm not doing. But no, like in seriousness, I think again it depends on what the crisis is, and there are no two things that are ever the same. That's definitely what I've come to find out. I've been at Meta now for nearly 5 years. There is no crisis that is exactly the same as another, right? Especially when it comes to different countries. So something that may look similar in Nigeria, the way it's amplified, talked about, is very different to South Africa. So I think for me, what's really important, I think first and foremost, and I say this to everyone, and I say this to my team, is when you're dealing with a crisis, you have to have a cool, calm head, right?
Yep.
Because there are lots of people, and I see this day in, day out, people that get really flustered and flapped and everything else. All that happens is A, you can't think clearly. B, there are other people around you that whether you need to kind of update or take along the journey with you, everyone else then becomes flustered and everyone starts stressing. And then it just becomes this whole big stress thing and everyone's freaked. It's like, no, let's deal with this calmly. And if we go on something with a calm, clear head, you can see through the weeds more, right? So then the other part is looking at, okay, what is this issue? What is the ground truth? Because, you know, there are many times when there's something comes in, actually, how it's positioned is not what it is at all. Quite often. Yes. So what is the ground truth? Great, okay. If we don't know the ground truth, who are the people I need to talk to get that? Or how much of that can I get? That's the next really important stage. Then I think it's then looking at, and look, every company is different, right? So what you're going to say externally. And some companies you can probably say a bit more, some you can say probably a bit less, depending on the situation. But whatever it is, you know, you have to obviously take that direction. And, you know, statements. And if need be, you know, there's been times that I've actually called journalists to be like, you don't really understand, like to really take them through. And I think that's one of the other things as well. And I think like, look, and I saw in one of the questions that you sent to me beforehand about, you know, the continent. I think, you know, because I have done, you know, worked in the UK for many years, you know, everyone will hear that I've got a very English accent, but I always say to people, please don't be fooled, because when I need to, yeah, I'm African.
Hey, you can turn it on where you need to. I like it.
I'm African through and through. There's nothing. So when people like, you know, especially our own people, and they hear the accent, they try to be doing maneuvers. I'm like, listen, no. So I think, but
I'm gonna touch on that actually. You come back to that. I think that's a line of conversation.
Yeah, but I think kind of going back to, because, you know, like, you know, if you look at the comms or the media industry compared to the UK or the US or, you know, maybe even APAC or, you know, in like Singapore or wherever it is, you know, we're quite far behind when we talk about the media industry, right? So there are even basics of, you know, I know that if I'm doing an event in South Africa, it needs to be done a very certain way than if I'm doing an event in Kenya or in Ghana, because, you know, somewhere like Kenya, you have to really be forcing the media. Are you sure you don't have any questions? Are you sure? Then you realize that actually, you know, Kenya, no one likes to really put their hand up and ask questions in group settings. So actually, you're better off first and foremost doing your event than offering one-to-ones. Then you can clarify anything that they need, but no one wants to put their hand up. Whereas, you know, in Ghana, you know, where I've recently been, or, you know, elsewhere, everyone's like, want to start asking questions, throwing it left, right, and center. And I think that, you know, with that, a lot of kind of education needs to come in. So as I was saying, you know, pick up the phone to call the journalist. Like, we have to also do our jobs in really getting people to understand whether it's the product or the brand or even how things work. Because I think, you know, and this isn't all African journalists, of course, but I think, you know, we are quite far behind when it comes to the media industry, even like reporting, even the comms industry, even how, you know, things like measurement. We're still years behind how they can do that. So I really see kind of our role as, you know, really helping to try and forge that along. And I think, if anything, that's, you know, hopefully the legacy that I want to lead is that I, in some way, help to, you know, push through communications in Africa and how we do that. But I've kind of digressed from your initial question, but
I think you kind of, it's kind of bled very well into the next question I was going to ask about the differences between doing PR from your, let's call your previous life, working with like global UK, European brands, and doing PR in an African context. I think we kind of started touching on that, but I want to sort of drill down a little bit more into that, because I think one of the things for me, because I think our paths are not too dissimilar in terms of working with UK focused companies doing that kind of PR, and then shifting over to work with Africa focused, like working in a more African context. And for me, especially in the first couple of years, there was a bit of a culture shock in terms of some of the things, like you mentioned it, like some of the measurements, some of the things that you have to deal with. And there's some things that were, for me anyway, some things I found to be better. Like I found like it was much easier to access the African journalists from my experience. Like everyone just wants to give you their WhatsApp number, and you just kind of, from my experience anyway. But I want to sort of throw that question to you in a way, like in the last 5 years you've been at Meta, versus your previous career before that point. What are the similarities or differences, or how would you describe those two worlds, if you want to put it that way?
So I would probably say it's in the same kind of vein when I think about Africa in general, right? So the way that I see it is it's very, it's dynamic, it's different, it's very different to UK, but I love that. And it's very different in terms of, you have more opportunities, right? The opportunity is definitely there. The opportunity to really, I think when you think about the UK or the US or other Western, countries, everyone is cynical, right? Everyone is very cynical. When you think about Africa, everyone, actually just genuinely, Africans are much more optimistic, right? Everyone's got a side hustle. Everyone wants to do stuff. Everyone. So actually, when you kind of get into that, and you can't be helped but feel like, be taken along that journey as well, and have that feeling too, like, I want to be, there's something happening here, I want to be part of it. There's a movement. And, I always say these things, especially when I'm wherever I am on the continent, which, and, I get a little bit frustrated. I'm always like, hey, gosh, Africa shall rise. That's my thing. But I actually really believe that. And I think, as much as, yes, there may be some things that, things like measurement, like, how are we going to, but you know what, we find ways around it. My team, we find ways around it. And you're absolutely right. Like, journalists are much more open to having conversations. I think people are much more open to experiences. So like, even if I think about, here in the UK or even in Brazil or wherever, experiential, everyone does experiential. Like, it just, even the average person walking past the street now will be able to spot an experiential something. No one's really doing that on the continent. Like, I remember the first time that I did something like that, like in Nigeria, everyone was like blown away, like, wow, what is this thing? And so I just feel like there's so much more opportunity. And there are things that, whether you've done comms like me, like in the US or UK or across Europe, that you can bring to the region that can really kind of help make that difference. But I think for me as well, what I've taken out of it is that, do you know what? Everything, when you're kind of in the UK, it's always usually black or white. It's not black or white when you're doing comms. When you're doing comms across Africa, it's not, right? There's always like a middle and different shades and everything else. And I've really appreciated that. So, I think, this is something, I mean, yes, there are big differences. And, when I speak to even my global colleagues, when I'm trying to kind of educate them about local things and context, it literally blows their mind. Like, oh, really? But for me, that's Africa. And as I said, I'm raised in, like you, I'm raised in an African household. I've got many friends from all over so I understand it anyway. So to me, it was shock. I was kind of doing a bit of stuff in South Africa, in Mozambique anyway, through some of the brands that I was working with. So none of this was actually a shock to me, and it was a natural progression. But yeah, so I feel like there are big differences, but how I see those differences is that they're more, rather than differences that frustrate me and think, why am I doing this? I see it's more as opportunities.
Yeah, I get that. I agree with 100%. I think that's a very helpful outlook to have on the situation, because I think otherwise it can be a bit too doom and gloomy. And I think, to be honest, like I said, I think that's not the story that we really want to, or in my opinion, should be telling. But that's another conversation for another time. The next question I want to have, again, like you kind of touched on it a little bit, is about the tools you use as part of your job. Yes, we talked about some of the tools, like in terms of media databases, measurements, all these kind of things that aren't really like some work still needs to be done. So let's, if you're being honest, in terms of building those tools that we use for our job. But in terms of how you do your job on a day-to-day basis, are there any tools that you kind of like swear by? Like these are the things that I use and they make a huge difference to the work we do, or tools that your wider team uses?
Yeah, like look, we have a whole measurements team in Meta. So, you know, they use various tools, and, you know, I can't tell you the exact science of how they work. Essentially, what we do is provide everything to them. They go off in the background and, you know, they kind of come up with charts and this and share a voice and all that kind of stuff. So we do look at things like share of voice. We do look at things like tone, negative, positive, all of that kind of stuff. And so there are things that we actually do measure ourselves on. I think, like, you know, when I think Africa specific, as you would know, you know, in our countries, not all media have, you know, in terms of you can get numbers, right?
Yeah.
We know this, I know you very well. So for me, how you know, when I'm thinking about my team and how we're measuring, is we're also measuring through, yes, tone is very incredibly important, but impact in terms of, like, look, if this is an Africa-wide story, why are we only getting coverage in Nigeria? Right? So actually, if it's an Africa-wide story, we should be looking to target across the whole of the continent with a number of countries that are really kind of like highlighting this story. So I think that reach is always really important for something that's a wide story. And I think, like, also as well, like, and not to say that they're the only ones available, because there are other good ones available too. But when we need to think about like syndicating media coverage, for me, it blew my mind that when I first started, I was just like, there's no company that does this. I actually had an idea that maybe I would be that, but then I got a bit lazy. It was just like, oh, like, you don't have a, you know, like in the UK, you can have like a syndication service.
Like a newswire.
Yeah, like a newswire. Like, didn't really have that. Like, now we do. There are a few, and there's one that we use. It's not perfect, to be honest. And, you know, I've been very open with them about it as well. But, you know, I think that tool for me is incredibly important, especially when, you know, we're thinking about, and as you will know, you know, when you have WhatsApp and Instagram and Facebook and all the other things, there's a lot that we're telling a lot of the time. So we need to think about how we're segmenting media and not telling the same stories to everyone to cannibalize other stories. So there are times when I will use a newswire, like an APO or whatever, to get that out. And then where then our teams and the agencies support us will do more targeted outreach on specific stories.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, because I think that's the real challenge. A lot of, I think for my team as well, like our clients are a few rungs on the ladder below Meta at the moment, but it's just, I think some of the challenges are similar in terms of that broad Pan-African approach, excuse me, but then knowing how to then drill down into individual markets and making your storytelling actually do the job it's meant to do. So there's a lot of, there are many conversations we can go into on that front, but I don't think time will permit us today, because I think we don't have that much time left. The final question, we have some questions. Thankfully, some people have sent in their questions ahead, and at this point, I'd like to encourage anyone, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask Kezia as we go along, please drop them in the chat, and I'll run them by Kezia. Some people have already sent in their questions. I'm going to run them by her. But before we get to that, the final question I wanted to ask is your advice, either, so we can block into two things. So for people just starting their career in PR and comms, so people in the very early stages of their career, what advice would you give them? But also for people who, maybe people who join the session who may be considering a career in PR and comms, like what kind of advice would you give to them?
Sure. So I think they're both kind of similar. I mean, look, what I would always say is, and I'm sure that you know this as well, Femi, you know, we've known each other for a while, but relationships are so important, right? Unfortunately, it's kind of like who you know, where the opportunities will come in. And you know, what I always tell people all the time is that, you know, experience is really important, and who you know, you only can be able to get that if you do work experience, right? So, you know, yes, you're, you know, probably just coming into comms, you're not going to get a work placement that's going to be paying you like loads and loads of money, right? You have to be aware and willing that they'll probably pay your transport, most of them do now, and, you know, maybe lunch money, but you need to be aware that you'll need to be doing, like, you know, a bit of the slog, as it were, and doing free work for a while. And that's just to get experience, to even find out if comms is what you want to do. I know many people that have started in comms and have completely moved away from it because they've been like, this is not what I want at all. And you'll only know that if you kind of experience it. Also, comms is such a big, like, communications is huge. What do you want to do? Is it consumer? Is it, like, you know, is it fashion? Is it, you know, corporate? Is it, like, there are so many different, exactly, B2B, all of that kind of stuff. So there's so many different types of comms as well, that again, I think it's important to get exposure so you can at least understand what the differences are. So I always say, like, look, first port of call is like door knocking. And it's door knocking, like, look, go to agencies, like, you know, PR agencies, wherever you are, if you're in London or Manchester or whatever, put your hands up that you'll do free work for them and work experience for a couple of weeks or for a month, maybe go back during some holidays and do things. Because as you start to do, they start to understand the industry more. And also you start to make relationships. And trust me, I realized very early on that it's a very small industry. So everyone knows everyone. Like in the UK, especially if you're in the UK space, you definitely know someone who knows someone. Right. So, and as I said, for me, that's where, you know, that's what's been so helpful for me, and on my journey as well, is the knowing someone who knows someone and kind of really pushing down those doors. So that's my advice that I would give. And I'd say, like, look, you know, don't be precious about it. And, like, you know, one of the other things as well, and, you know, I'm sure there's a lot of kind of like Blacks who are watching, or kind of Africans, is that, like, you know, we know that the comms space is predominantly dominated by whites, right? We know that. So we know that there's still a job to do. And I know there's some brilliant organizations that are really trying to push down the door, whether it's the Taylor Bennett Foundation, who I do a lot of work with, but there are others as well. So I think, like, you know, again, it's just knowing, being aware of that, and just not, you know, taking no for an answer, or not letting negative experiences cloud what you want to do. I remember going for a job interview. I had the interview on the phone. It was great. Met like loads of people, like, you know, the, you know, account directors, the associate directors. Everyone loved me. It was great. Then the MD met me. I remember when she looked down, she came down, met me at the lobby. She looked me up and down. And I was just like, eesh, this one. Looks me up and down. It's a very well-known agency. Looked me up and down. We went upstairs for the interview. The way that she was even looking at me. Then she turned around to the recruiter and said, oh, that I'm not right for her agency. I'm not her kind.
Oh, that'll trope.
Yeah, and I remember the recruiter exactly. I remember the recruiter saying, "Ken, I'm so sorry. I just don't know what to say, because this job was in the bag. Like, the feedback from everyone." And, you know, after a few years go by, and, you know, people start getting names in the industry, and then I started hearing a few things about this woman. It's very obvious. I was like, thank God I didn't go there. But so I think I'm saying that just to say to people here that, you know, don't take no for an answer, and don't stop just because you may. Unfortunately, that's the world that we live in, but it's definitely getting better. You know, when I started at Meta, to be honest, I always kind of had this conversation with my senior boss. I was the only Black person in the team. I mean, it blew my mind. I'm like, hold on, for like a whole, like, how is this possible? And even when I look at it now, like, you know, I'm still the only Black director outside of the US. So, you know, so I know a lot of work needs to be done. So I'm basically saying that in terms of, don't take no for an answer. Don't be put off when you have negative experiences, because they will come. If you're African, if you're Black, so forth, that will happen. But just keep pushing through. And look, the relationships that you make is what will really kind of help push you through to the next and ongoing stages of your career. So I think that's kind of applicable for both those that are already in comms and those that want to kind of go into comms.
Excellent. So relationships and keep pushing. Like I love that. So yeah, let's just go quickly. We've got about 5 minutes or so left, so we're just going to go quickly into some of the questions that have been sent in. So one of the questions was that what does it take to stay relevant in the industry, and how do you, like a two-part question. The second half is how do you constantly engage with the African diaspora with great campaigns?
Look, to stay relevant, I think, again, this goes back to what we said right at the beginning, like what's new, how are people, things like technology. So now everyone's talking about the metaverse, right? So how are we staying relevant with something around like the metaverse and how, it's being used, and even like, other new technologies, or, creators are a thing now that everyone is, wanting to work with and is after. And so I think it's always kind of like looking at those new things, but also sometimes you be that person to actually create it as well, right? So it's not always about following the trend, but I think even when it comes to comms, you can create or co-create new amazing experiences. So I think that's about staying relevant, and also really importantly, your audience, target audience. Where are they? Who are they listening to? What are they doing? You'll only ever stay relevant if you're relevant to them.
Yep.
So again, that's kind of first and foremost. And the other part of it, I can't remember now. What was that?
Yeah, second one, how do you constantly engage the African diaspora with great campaigns? Kind of feeds into what you're talking about already, I think.
Yeah, I think I've kind of said it again.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And then the final question is, what are some tips and tricks for getting PR coverage from popular media houses for a startup? So any suggestions on any tricks that you
Depends. Are you talking UK or are you talking an
let's look at an African context.
Oh, African context, fine. Look, I think that, again, do you know what, funny enough, relationships are really important. So, to actually know the journalists and have their phone numbers, and just being able to pick up the phone with them. Again, everything I realize is that our people, we love free things. Just take them out for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Like, talk to them as well. So to do that. So I think, like, look, having those relationships, but equally as well, you have to also map back to that media title. That's the same as comms as anywhere in the world. So why would it be relevant to them? If you're going to sell a story to Bella, you wouldn't sell the same story to Bella Niger as you would to The Guardian.
Yeah.
Right? So you'd have to tweak it and make it relevant to their audience. So I think it's kind of, thinking about that as well. If you're thinking about, okay, Bella Niger specific, I'm a startup. Okay, startup, are you in the fashion space or in the makeup space, or are you about making people's lives easier? Okay, that's more likely to be something for Bella Niger. Okay, so how can you, you don't always know the answer. So sometimes it's a phone call to, how can we co-create? One of the guys on my team, ladies on my team, did this amazingly. Last year, we ended up doing this co-creation feature with like Bella Niger and the title in Ghana. And it was literally her having conversations saying, look, these are, we have SMB, small, medium businesses who are using our platforms, who are selling their products. Lots of them are making lots of money. They're selling internationally. We really want to profile these people and what they're doing. How can we work together to do that? And something was created. It came up and looked amazing, right? Included like digital, included magazine takeover, included all of that kind of stuff. Some of that stuff, yes, some of it was paid, but you can do stuff like that that's not paid as well. Yeah.
I guess, that collaboration. I think it goes back to what you mentioned before. It's much easier to have those conversations if the relationships already exist. It's much, you can get to that point where you're co-creating a little bit faster than if you're just cold calling the journalists you've never engaged with before.
Absolutely. And like, look, if you're cold calling as well, like always have your why are you calling them? Why should they listen? And what's in it for their readers? If it's a startup, if you know that, you know, the readers of the start, those readers, everyone's really into business and everyone's really into investing, everyone's really, then you'd pitch it as, this is the next unicorn that's coming out of, you know, Africa. This is where, exactly, this is, you know, and that's how you'd pitch it. So I think you have to also look at the client that you're pitching on behalf of, or whatever it is, and how you position that. But positioning it is how it's really important. Positioning.
Hopefully whoever asked that question is on the call today and got those answers. But yeah, thank you so much, Kezia, for your time. I've really enjoyed. I hope you've enjoyed the competition. I've really enjoyed it. These are sort of the competition that I get to have with Kezia behind closed doors. But I just figured let's open it up to the world and get more people to listen in. Thank you, first of all, to Kezia once again for joining, and thank you to everyone else for joining us again, for today's session. So the plan is to host one of these talks like once a quarter. So hopefully in the next few weeks, we're going to announce what we're going to be doing next for the next one. But once again, thank you all for joining, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
Take care. Bye.